Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be covering what I think the 2024 UK election results will be standing right now with each of the different Conservative candidates. First, I want to point out though that I am using the website, it's principalfish.co.uk. It's a great website. I do not know the person who makes it, but that's what I'm using, I guess, because people ask. Um, so yeah, so this is currently what the polls say if an election were held today. This is roughly the average. Uh, I've set it up or amounts or percents of the vote in each United Kingdom, essentially a state, um, and also I guess we could call them constituent nations, like Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and of course all the different areas in England. And currently the polls say that Labour, the left-wing party, is on a path for a majority with 92-ish seats. That's pretty optimistic overall for Labour, but I do think that this is currently just what the polls show. The Conservatives are heading for an absolute disaster at the moment, but a candidate can change a lot of things. And as the Tories select their leadership candidate, I think there can be a lot of different options, I guess. So first, let's start with what if Boris Johnson was somehow still Prime Minister? Because this is really important when we get to talking about the different coalitions that are forming in the Conservative leadership race. So here's what we have. And Conservatives are suffer an absolutely massive defeat. Keir Starmer's basically Tony Blair-esque, and the Liberal Democrats gain a ton of seats as well. Most of this is in the South and the like typical red wall area. Um, Not too surprising. Maybe the South is surprising for some viewers, but for the most part, this is what you can expect. It would be an absolute Labour wipeout. But of course, Boris Johnson's resigning. So I'm going to start with the current leader in the Conservative leadership election, which is Rishi Sunak. Sunak is also likely going to lose. This is down to many things. Firstly, he's extremely unpopular among the general electorate. He has had roughly a plus minus rating that was on the plus side for a very long period of time until right before Boris Johnson resigned when it plummeted. And he is not only one of the richest people in UK politics just ever, but also there's been a lot of backroom deals that did not look kindly on him. Additionally, it's hard to see the old Brexiteers voting for him because he wants to raise taxes on businesses, which probably turns much of conservative media against him, which is much more on the right wing of the Conservative Party. So I think that if Sunak wins, those newspapers don't support him as much as they otherwise would, and they've already been attacking him in the press. So I think he's on course for a massive loss if he wins. However, that's not who I think will win the leadership election. I think Penny Mordaunt will win the leadership election, and I think she is probably the best candidate the Conservatives have who can win. I'm not going to go to Tom Tugendhat because he's not going to win. It's just I don't see a realistic chance of him winning. Penny gains a lot of support from both the old Brexiteer camp and also the much newer social liberal paternalistic wing that Boris Johnson has sort of tried to recover, but it was too little too late essentially after he kind of shoved them out over Brexit. I think that if Penny Mordaunt were to be the leader and the election was held today after an election campaign, so maybe the election would be in a few weeks, the Conservatives probably lose that too. The Conservatives are down a lot in the polls. It's really bad. They have 27-ish% of the vote right now, 28. Labor's currently at 43. So that is an automatic wipeout, basically. In this scenario, as you can see, some Lib Dems, so the old remaining conservative voters, probably support Penny more than they would any other conservative candidate. I also think that she wins back some of the more disaffective red wall conservatives which really does help her maintain a hung parliament. Now, in this scenario, the hung parliament isn't really useful because the SNP, or Scottish Nationalist Party, is unlikely to agree to any Conservative government when their policies extremely overlap with Labour. So I think that the SNP would probably support Labour in this deal. If not, then a Labour minority government, maybe with the Lib Dems, could also work. I don't see a route for conservative governing in this scenario, but I do think if Penny Mordaunt was able to, for example, out-debate Keir Starmer in the run-up to an election, maybe that could change some things. But for now, I think this is the best the Conservatives are managing, even though it's still a loss. Next, we have someone who can possibly do well, but it will depend on a lot of different things. Now, this is Liz Truss. Liz Truss, I think, is a very interesting candidate because Liz Truss is on the right wing of the Conservative Party, but she is also popular with the more left wing, southern based area of the party. Much of the South, the Southwest, and Southeast has had a long conflict politically between the more centrist, almost Lib Dem conservative faction and the more right wing, libertarian conservative faction that Truss herself represents. But I think that if Truss does win, it really helps in the south of England. Just looking at Penny Mordaunt's performance, of course, Penny does better, but that's because on the whole, I do believe Penny is just a better general election candidate. But if you compare Truss to Sunak, they win roughly the same amount of the popular vote, but 92 majority for Labour in the Sunak scenario versus only a 42 majority in the Truss scenario. And I think this is because Truss is better in the South, whereas Truss might do worse in some of those already red wall areas that Sunak himself won't win. Truss might do worse than Sunak there, but Truss has already lost those, whereas Truss is essentially a more efficient seat winner than Sunak in this scenario. And last, we have essentially the last person who can oppose Truss on the right wing in the leadership race, probably the furthest right candidate left in the leadership race, Bardenok. Now, Bardenok, I think, does poorly. There are many reasons for this, but probably the most obvious one is she's very right wing, and that turns her off for a lot of Lib Dem or inclined voters. I also think that despite her extremely pro Brexit stance, uh, the ultra pro Brexit voters are probably wooed back to the Labour Party by Keir Starmer anyway, especially with the media's attacks on just people of color, at least the right wing media's attacks. So that is really bad for Bardenok if Bardenok were to win. Uh, so yeah, that's it. I guess I think Bardenok gets destroyed in an election. I think Truss loses, but it is competitive. Just it's not that competitive towards the end of the campaign. But if Truss were to massively out debate Starmer, then I do think Truss can potentially get this to a hung parliament. I think Penny Mordaunt, if she out debates Starmer, maybe makes a conservative Lib Dem coalition possible. Although I do think Lib Dems are much more inclined towards Labour. But at the very least, the conservative plurality in parliament. I think that Sunak gets destroyed, and I don't even think he's capable of out-debating Keir Starmer based on some of the positions he's taken. And of course, I think that Boris Johnson would get absolutely smoked if he somehow was able to come back before the next election. I don't see that happening. So yeah, that's I guess all there is. I think that Sunak's 174-seat loss is huge, not as large as 240-seat, but the 92-seat current poll projections are very important. So yeah, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.